Welcome back to Tales from Aelithia. For our tale today, we'll need to turn back time. A lot. A time before the Centrum Wars. The beautiful planet of Aelithia, with life flourishing abundantly upon it. We land in the prime city, Thrymheim. The light of Aneris gleams down onto the first city created by man and god alike. Aelithia first planted her foot at the city center when she arrived in her created world. And the city has flourished since the dawn, the very beginning of this world. We present to you a short story, The Defenders of Thrymheim. So much of history has been lost over the millennia, but a well-educated historian would estimate that Thrymheim was created about 2,500 years before year zero. Our story, however, unfolds about 2,200 years before year zero. And religious leaders believe that this was about 9 to 10 years after Aelithia left this world to reside in Divum Paradise. To give a quick introduction, we see Reaper, the representative of the god Null, strolling down the city streets of the Prime City. A quick glance at another part of Thrymheim, we see Akaiyus, High Priest of Aneris, filling the city with radiant light and joy. Another camera pan, and there is Delelor, Prime Deparum of the Raven Mother, and her pet saber, Simonomis. Lastly, on the city outskirts is Xalek Kelax, a manifestation of the physical, natural life created by Shantnea and Sylvanus. While these four individuals knew each other quite well, they would never be closer than today. But they didn't know that quite yet. Atop the high hill of Thrymheim, beyond the gladiator of the gods' arena, was the grand temple of Aelithia, a monument dedicated to the creator of this world. Inside such a structure was also the convening point of the Patheios, or better, the collective of deities that Aelithia had appointed to govern the world after her departure. Life was different back then. Gods regularly walked the streets, teaching mortals their way of life. It was beautiful, and it was peaceful. Or at least it was. On one particular afternoon, someone arrived at the Patheios, within the Grand Temple. A man, or perhaps just a being that looked like one, stood in front of the legendary Celestials. He introduced himself as the Unspoken One. And such a name would naturally intrigue anyone, even the gods. So they permitted him entry into the Grand Temple. Before their time of convening that day, the strange man visited with several of the gods in private conversation. No one is sure what he said or discussed, as the scribes only recorded seeing him enter celestial chambers and exiting at a later time. But when the time came for the convening for that day, he delivered a speech in front of the entire Patheios. The most notable and decisive line being, "Aren't you all tired of subservience? Don't you dream of something more? Something of your own without the confines placed upon you?" And in a single question, a debate sparked across the Patheios. For some, this concept, this idea, was outrageous. How dare someone question the authority and guidance of Aelithia herself? But to others, they did, somehow, desire such a world. And one by one, they began to agree with the plea and appeal of the Unspoken One. It was not until this conflict escalated that this man, the Unspoken One, took it upon himself to intervene in divine affairs. On holy ground, on the most holy ground, on the whole planet of Aelithia, a deity whose name will never be known because its name was never recorded and a record of it never survived, was slain. A god dying on holy ground. That was an act that would violate the very precious natural order, the fabric of the world of Aelithia. It would be the first murder in the world. The very act split the ground, quite literally. A scream piercing out from this dying deity as an earthquake centered on the highest point of Thrymheim erupted. As a low rumble ruptured across Thrymheim, our four esteemed individuals discussed earlier rushed towards the scream as parts of the grand temple collapsed. The booming voices of the deities could now be heard across the city. Not only was the Patheios collapsing, but it was also dividing. Not moments after, as we see Akaiyus, Delelor, and Simonomis, Xalek Kelax, and Reaper helping save the citizens of Thrymheim from the horrible quake, a group of deities flew away from the Patheios of the Grand Temple. In the chaos, the Unspoken One slipped into the shadows of commotion and destruction. And the quake spreading further, our adventurers sprinted to check in on their own deities. Thankfully to them, their respective gods were fine. At least, they were physically fine. As they all, their deities moving with them now, moved away from the Grand Temple, the last part of the Patheios collapsed into Diviner's Bay. The gladiator of the gods' arena also collapsed. While the quakes did come to a halt eventually, the destruction in the center portion of Thrymheim was catastrophic. The gods and goddesses that remained in Thrymheim following the incident, which came to be known or called the Splicavarium, meaning the Great Split, collectively formed a group of gods known as the Protectorum, because of their position to protect Aelithia's rule over this world, and honor their commitments to defend and uphold it. The Protectorum, also called the Protectoros gods, gathered the remaining citizens, including our four individuals, who would come to be known as the Defenders, to take up defense to protect Thrymheim from what the gods expected to be an attack on the Prime City by the gods who had rebelled, which they called the Rebellios. And such a suspicion was right, because not but a few days after the Splicavarium, at which the city had destroyed the bridges crossing over the river Everreach, and constructed a rudimentary fortification along the land entrance to the Prime City, scouts spotted movement in the Everreach woods to the west of the city. As trees were toppled in great number, it became increasingly apparent to the Protectorum gods that great monsters accompanied by some of the Rebellios deities themselves were here to make an attack on the city. A conflict of divine proportions broke out on the outskirts of Thrymheim. The defenders of Thrymheim, along with other mortal citizens, empowered by the Protectorum gods, took a daring stand to not let the city fall. Somehow evading the necrotic powers at play, the towering monsters, and even facing off some of the Rebellios gods themselves, the defenders of Thrymheim successfully defended the Prime City. Using powers granted by the Protectorum gods, the three attacking Rebellios deities and the monsters were pushed into other realms, at least temporarily. The defenders of Thrymheim, and subsequently what the conflict became known as the Defense of Thrymheim, would be the first conflict of the Great Centrum Wars. As heroes and defenders of Thrymheim, surviving citizens, including Delelor, Akaiyus, Reaper, Simonomis, and Xalek Kelax, would be rewarded favorably by the gods. Moradin, the great forge and anvil, would craft the Hammer of Thrymheim, using materials from the collapsed Patheos and Grand Temple. He would inscribe the names of those who defended the Prime City onto the hilt. Unfortunately, just 22 days later, the monsters that faced off in the city, all of the rebellious deities, including the Unspoken One, all returned to Thrymheim to destroy it in a battle now referred to as the Fall of Thrymheim. The Protectorum gods, along with as many citizens as they could take, escaped the city before its complete and total destruction. What happened to the 4 defenders after that, or anything else in Thrymheim for that matter, are stories lost to history and time. In fact, the very ruins of Thrymheim have yet to be uncovered to this very day. And while the Centrum Wars did, ultimately, come to a conclusion, the destruction and loss and devastation that it caused could never be measured. This story is recorded in few books, and it could be called a miracle that we even know as much as we do, and were able to find such records. For now, however, that concludes this tale from Aelithia, The Defenders of Thrymheim, a short story.